inhabitants, their children too. And their children forever true.
It never ends. Please, I need you to do something. This village is the true secret. Testament to the old sins. It feeds this hunter's nightmare. Please, bring to an end the horror. So our forefathers sinned. We hunters cannot bear their weight forever. It isn't fair. It just isn't fair.
Hello, hunters, and welcome. Today we would like to tell a story. Now, as with any story within the Soulsborne series, this will be us taking what puzzle pieces Bloodborne provides and fitting them in place as well as we can. In no way is this meant to be the definitive series of events involving Gehrman, Lady Maria, and the sin committed in the fishing village. Only two hunters' opinion on what may have precipitated both the hunter's dream and his nightmare.
Very little is known about Gehrman's origins, but we do know from the Burial Blade's item description that he was the first hunter. With that in mind, it is important at this point to state our belief that both the hunter's dream and the nightmare having an apostrophe before the S belong to Gehrman, and exist partly to torment him and keep him captive in his aging and fading mind. We know from 2 of 3 endings for this to be the case. In the first optional ending, Gehrman offers you a deal to take your life and free you from this terrible hunter's dream. This decision leaves Gehrman stuck within the dream, destined to await another hunter and hoping this one will fight back and end his suffering.
If instead, however, Gehrman is fought and defeated, we see the player character take his place, cementing them not only in Gehrman's old wheelchair, but also in his dream. As Gehrman passes, he exclaims with his last breath, "The night and the dream were long." From this, we can assume that whatever happened that led him to be enslaved to the dream and the nightmare happened so long ago that it has now been lost to time. With the Old Hunters DLC, we believe we are being given a window to the past, and that all the secrets of Gehrman and the Old Hunter's sins are held within the Hunter's nightmare.
With all of that in mind, it must be assumed that the events of the Hunter's Nightmare are all connected directly with Gehrman and his restless sleep within the dream. The DLC starts with an amygdala who takes any hunter in possession of the blood-drunk eye and puts them in a very familiar yet twisted cathedral ward. We fight our way through hunters and beasts who are caught up in a never-ending battle. Within the Grand Cathedral, we find Lawrence inanimate and in the same position that his skull is found within the waking world. As the first cleric beast in cohort of both Gehrman and Willem, it is no surprise that this is where he would end up. We find Simon the Harrowed near the first shortcut, and he tells us this is a place where hunters end up when drunk with blood. He mentions a secret held within the dream, and if we say we are interested in this nightmare, remarks that it's as if the spirit of Bergenworth lives on within us. Simon was a hunter of the church who would disguise himself and hide among the wretches of society and be one of the first to warn the church of any blood transformations among the populace. We then work our way to Ludwig and see the fate of a man who never questioned the healing church and took all of the blood ministered to him faithfully and gratefully. A twisted beast that dwells in an underground hell with only the corpses of his victims to keep him company. This man has lost not only his humanity, but also himself. Halfway through the fight, his moonlight greatsword is thrown to the ground, and by glimpsing its guiding light, we see Ludwig remember who he was, and we resume the fight against a calculated man who wields his blade with deadly precision. After defeated, Ludwig is nothing more than the head of the beast slain, and he wonders about the fate of the hunters of the church and whether or not his denigration was worth it. It is our opinion that whether this is Ludwig in actuality, or just a representation of Gehrman's memories of him, his fate would surely torture the old man who was once a friend and mentor to this despicable beast.
Upon leaving the underground corpse pile that had become a home to Ludwig, We find ourselves entering the Healing Church's prison. We hear the old hunter Yakamura wheezing out the mantra of the church hunters, all while banging his head against the wall of his cell. Clearly, whatever this man witnessed or inflicted has left him completely mad and lost within his own mind. We find a woman in a cell, curled over and immortalized in a position of prayer. We learn only her name and fighting style from the weapon procured from her corpse, but one thing is for sure. Gradia would have been an old hunter who fought beside Gehrman in days long forgotten. We find in a cell placed away from the others the church assassin called Brador. It appears that after his quest to destroy anyone who were getting too close to the church's dreadful secrets had reached its end, he himself was held prisoner to ensure his silence. Given the fate of the hunters he had been sent for, this almost appears a kindness. They did after all let him keep his wonderful little bell. So from the prison section alone, we know that something so dreadful took place that it took Yakamura and Gradia's mind, and that the Healing Church had taken vicious and violent actions to ensure that no one could ever find out about it.
Past the prison, we enter a large room with beds laid out in a way to suggest that they are there for the sick and the afflicted. They are covered in drapes of silk and have a welcoming way about them. Present in this room are two women wearing both the black and white garb of the Healing Church. We know from the item description held on the garb that they are both in fact doctors as well as being hunters, though they excel at both with deadly and often horrific precision. At the back of the room we see an altar containing 3 human figures crouched over a fourth in what appears to be a surgical operation. They wear not only the garb of the church, but also appear to have covered their eyes, which we know from the blindfold cap to be a nod of recognition to Willem and their debt to the knowledge of Byrgenwerth. How fitting is it then that in order to proceed we must place the eye medallion within the head of the patient laying upon the altar. Since it is said that Willem had sought to line his brain with eyes, it seems to us to be very interesting that this is the only way to proceed to the most guarded area of the Healing Church.
Once again, we meet Simon at the top of the elevator, and he suggests that beyond is the real face of the Healing Church. He says that if we seek the secrets of the nightmare, we must ascend to the astral clock tower and kill the Lady Maria, for she hides the real secret. We then work our way through the nightmare's church research hall. We see patients with swollen heads bound in bandages and madness. The ones able to speak mention a Lady Maria and beg for her to return and end their suffering. We meet the nun Adeline, who was once a blood saint of the Healing Church. She tells us she needs brain fluid, murky, mushy brain fluid, which can be found upon 2 patients within the research hall whose heads have become so swollen that they are all that is left of them. Upon receiving the brain fluid, Adeline also transforms into a massive squishy head, and upon receiving brain fluid from herself, gifts us the milkweed rune, and then becomes deathly still. We then battle against the living failures, whose name suggests that it was not often that the subjects of the church's experiments survived to be labeled as such. From everything found within the research hall, we believe that the church was trying to finish the work started in Byrgenwerth and push humanity to its next evolution, no matter the cost in innocent life. They tricked the poor and destitute into thinking that they were a place of healing, with comfort and the means to ease their suffering, only to experiment and destroy any soul who sought help from them. We can assume that in the waking world they eventually succeeded in their work, as the living failures bear an uncanny resemblance to the celestial emissary found within the Lumenflower Gardens. We also know that Maria was heavily involved in the church's experiments, and tried as much as she could to ease the suffering of the poor trusting fools held captive within.
Within the astral clock tower we find the Lady Maria sitting slumped and motionless in a chair surrounded by a pool of blood that appears to originate from herself. On a table next to her we see a glass of what could either be blood or wine. Also on the table is a framed picture that is impossible to see due to the state of the cracked and filthy frame. Since it is said that Lady Maria held a great admiration for Gehrman, we believe that this could be a picture of the two in happier times. Upon inspecting her corpse, the lady awakens and states that a corpse should be left well enough alone. She says she knows well how the secrets beckon and that only an honest death can cure us from our wild curiosity. With these few lines of dialogue, we can speculate that Lady Maria would not appreciate the desecration of any corpse. We also know that she holds a desire and curiosity to find secrets, as she says she knows this well. She also believes that the only way to stop our curiosity is to give us an honest death. Perhaps this is the reason why she ended her own life. Perhaps this is the reason why she may have ended others.
After slaying the Lady Maria, we are given the Celestial Dial, which when held up reveals an opening in the tower that leads out and into the fishing hamlet. Now remember, if Simon is to be believed, then whatever the secret of the nightmare is, should be found here. We also find it curious that you can see the astral clock in the first area of the Hunter's Nightmare, and yet you don't see any fishing hamlet floating in the sky. None of the other nightmare sections of the game display this sort of oddity, and therefore we believe the fishing hamlet to be a very important place indeed. We see a shuffling humanoid figure walking from the fishing hamlet, muttering about Bergenworth and them being blasphemous and blood-crazed fiends. He mentions atonement for the wretches by the wrath of Mother Cause, and begs for mercy for a poor wizened child. He talks of a curse of blood laid upon them and their children, and their children's children, forevermore. He speaks of wretched births that will plunge each child into a life of misery, and begs for mercy once more for the poor wizened child. Also, that the pungence of cause will cling like a mother's devotion. If we wear the milkweed rune before speaking to him, we also receive some different dialogue and an item. The accursed brew received from him states that it is a skull of a local from the violated fishing village, and that the inside of the skull was forcibly searched for eyes, as evidenced by innumerable scratches and indentations. We believe the people of the fishing hamlet to be unlike the Yharnamites. We believe that these people are not mutated because of any sort of blood corruption, but instead believe them to have been simply born this way. In H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow over Innsmouth, the townspeople of a similar fishing village made a pact with ancient sea things and had begun to breed with them. We believe this is what was happening within the fishing hamlet, and that when Bergenworth learned of the interesting inhabitants of the village, moved in and began a series of torturous experiments that would lead to the beckoning of the moon presence and the imprisonment of Gehrman within the hunter's dream.
At the bottom of a well in the early area of the fishing hamlet, we find Lady Maria's weapon, Rakuyo. We know from this weapon's description that Lady Maria has a distaste for blood weapons and loved Rakuyo because it relied on dexterity and not blood. We also know that despite her love for this blade, she cast it into the well when she could stomach its presence no longer. What could have transpired to make the sight of her blade sick to her stomach? Perhaps it pertains to the last act taken with the weapon. While working our way forward through the fishing hamlet, we are invaded by Brador, the beast-eyed assassin, several times, indicating that we are getting close to the secret that he was charged with keeping. We eventually find Simon, who is deathly wounded, and are told that time and time again he is hunted by Brador. He then asks why should we be held responsible for the sins of our forefathers, and then he dies yet again. Only the old ones know how long this poor man must continue his atonement, his endless cycle of being hunted by Brador, but we know from him that the secret is close, and from Brador that it is desperately protected.
Near the end of the fishing hamlet, we find a great many odd female creatures, the upper half being human in nature, and the lower half being snail-like. Some of them have even begun to live with the bottom half of themselves curled up in shells. These creatures bring to mind another H.P. Lovecraft tale, the Dunwich Horror, where yet again there was breeding occurring between humans and great ones that resulted in the birth of a very interesting man named Wilbur Whaley. In this story, Wilbur's upper half appears human, although definitely odd and beyond the norm, and his lower half is that of an unearthly creature. We bring up this and the Shadow over Innsmouth example because these are two of H.P. Lovecraft's most well-known stories, so we think that they would be among those first read by Miyazaki and would therefore have a noticeable impact upon Bloodborne's lore. After battling many of these hostile half-woman creatures, we come across dozens that are no longer hostile and appear to be preying. Following the direction they are pointing, we find a beach with the body of a giant fish creature. This is Cause, and she has been murdered. Out from the side of her lifeless corpse's stomach crawls a pale and wretched-looking creature. Once he stands and stretches, we can't help but feel like we have seen him before. This is the Orphan of Cause, and he is Gehrman's son.
We would like to ask you a question, everyone. How do you kill a god? How do you then take that god's religious half-breed followers and experiment with and kill every single one of them? You have to have the element of surprise. It is the only way. You have to have a way of contacting the god to request a meeting and be trusted enough by that god for her to actually show up. We believe that Gehrman, at the behest of his masters Willem and Lawrence, was charged with investigating the strange happenings in the fishing hamlet. We know that this happened either so long ago or so far away that no trace of this hamlet can be found within the waking world. We believe that Gehrman went to the village and found the whole idea of this remote sect of cause worshippers' way of life interesting, and in fact kept them secret from Byrgenwerth and his masters there. We believe this to be the curious mania mentioned on the Maria gear. Most people believe that the use of the word mania in relation to the doll's costume infers that Gehrman's mania was a sex doll he fashioned after her when his affections went unrequited, which we believe to be false. If Gehrman did in fact love Maria and lust after her so much that he would create and care a doll that would remind him of her and give him at least some form of comfort for that affection, why in the world would he be so crass and uncaring about this object to tell us that we can use the doll in a very lewd fashion? We don't know about you, but we feel whoever built and kept the doll wouldn't be so willing to let some stranger jizz all over it. Unless, of course, he had grown to despise the doll's presence as much as the dream. We believe that Gehrman did make the doll, but for different reasons, as well as a different story behind his affections.
At some point, Gehrman began sleeping with Kaz, and it is possible that the half-woman creatures we see are in fact his daughters. Around the same time that he had impregnated Kaz with the Orphan, his masters at Byrgenwerth found out the truth, and decided that the best course of action, if they wished to experiment on these strange denizens within the fishing hamlet, was to turn Gehrman to their cause. We believe they came by this information by Simon the Harrowed, or a hunter like him, someone who went to the hamlet in the guise of a beggar, and discovered the horrible truth contained therein. They confronted Gehrman with the truth, and since Gehrman was such a trusting fool, who owed so much to Willem and Byrgenwerth, having been in their employ for many years, he told them everything and agreed to set a meeting with the Mother Kaz. They collectively decided that Kaz would be too dangerous to keep alive, and therefore planned the assassination of a god. When Mother Kaz arrived, she found not only Gehrman, but also his most trusted hunters lying in wait. She strode from the waters in the form of a human woman, and Maria, seeing an image of herself, was shocked. As one, the hunters attacked from the shadows, and slew Kaz before she could transform back into her true and much more powerful form. This is why there is still a human woman's face noticeable on the lifeless corpse. She chose the form of Maria to meet with Gehrman, because it pleased him, as he definitely did hold feelings for Maria, and her for him. Maria was sure to have had her training kick in over her disgust and revulsion, and had helped the hunters to slay Kaz. This act, and Gehrman's mania, led to the disposal of Rikuyo, and eventually, her very life. They then cut open the Mother Kaz's belly, and tore away a piece of the orphan's umbilical cord. Awful, really, considering a corpse should always be left well enough alone.
Following the murder of Kaz, Byrgenwerth and its scholars moved in to finish their grim scientific work. Heads were removed and opened, skulls scratched from the inside, and not a single person left that fishing hamlet alive. Once they were done, they buried their secrets there, and any hunter with knowledge of these acts was either locked away in the church's private prison cells or silenced by a bloody spiked mallet to the back. Gehrman was removed to the Healing Church workshop, and all access to both was blocked off. Perhaps another hunter was placed here with him, as we find the Bone of Quickening. This hunter could also have died well before the sins at Byrgenwerth. Here in his lonely sadness, Gehrman learned of Lady Maria's suicide, and this hurt him profoundly. He knew it was his fault that this fate had found her. He knew all of it was his fault, and so too did the old ones. On the 1/3 umbilical cord found inside the hunter's workshop within the waking world, it is said that this cord precipitated the coming of the moon presence. On a note found in the lecture hall, it is stated that Lawrence and his associates beckoned the moon presence. We believe that the acts in the fishing hamlet and the murder of Kaz is the way that they beckon the moon presence. We know they created a curse with their blasphemous acts, and a curse is surely what the moon presence is.
Gehrman is chosen as the host of the dream, but it exists despite him. If we kill Gehrman at the end of the game, the dream still holds. If we kill the moon presence and become an infant great one, the dream still holds. However, in every ending where the dream still exists, despite Gehrman and the moon presence being slain, the doll is ever present. We believe that the doll is the key to the curse, and is in fact a being of great and unknowable powers. This could be a separate manifestation of cause, and that is why she chose the form of the doll Gehrman had made in his grief. Or it could be a relative great one. Either way, one thing is clear from the cycle of Bloodborne's hunt, and that is that this being wants an infant great one to replace the one lost. We bring it blood echoes and it makes us strong enough to challenge and defeat Gehrman. If we use the full umbilical cord of the Great One, we are able to then challenge and defeat the moon presence and become an infant Great One. We believe this is the purpose of the dream. A life for a life. A child for a child.
Are you cold? Oh, good hunter.